I have to admit, I've been looking forward to this one all week.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, usually we are digging into these incredibly dense technical papers on, quantum computing or parsing through complex geopolitical histories that just leave your head spinning.
Right.
But today feels different. It feels like a warm hug.
A warm hug. Okay.
We are talking about one of the most beloved stories of the early 2000s. It is a story about friendship, about fuzzy blue monsters, about overcoming the things that scare us, and ultimately about the redeeming power of laughter. We are looking at the world of Monsters, Inc. And honestly, just thinking about Sulley and Mike Wazowski makes me smile. It's just pure nostalgia, right?
I see where you're going with this.
I think for a lot of us, it represents a simpler time.
I'm going to have to stop you right there.
Oh, okay. I mean, I know you like to dig deep and find the hidden angles, but don't tell me you're going to ruin Mike Wazowski for me.
Well,
he's a walking eyeball with a heart of gold. You can't possibly have beef with Mike.
see, that reaction right there, that is exactly the reaction the PR department of Monsters Incorporated is banking on.
What do you mean?
That warmth you're feeling, that nostalgia. That is a carefully engineered byproduct of what we are actually here to discuss today.
Okay.
We aren't here to do a movie review. We aren't here to talk about animation techniques or, voice acting. We are here to conduct a forensic audit of a criminal enterprise.
A criminal enterprise. Come on, we're talking about a kid's movie. It's Pixar.
We are talking about the source material titled The Scream Monopoly. And if you look at the documents in front of us, the thesis is incredibly stark.
So this isn't a story about a benevolent utility company that learns a heartwarming lesson.
Not even close. This is an exposé on a concept the report calls trauma capitalism.
Trauma capitalism. That sounds significantly heavier than I was expecting.
It is heavy.
Yeah.
And I need you to shift your mindset. The mission of this deep dive isn't to relive the funny moments.
No.
It's to investigate the leaked report that claims Monsters, Inc., the company itself, is a predatory extractor of bioresource emotional outputs.
So wait, you're setting up roles here.
Yes. You're playing the role of the public today. You see the fuzzy fur, the jokes, the buddy comedy.
And you.
I'm playing the role of the whistleblower. I'm looking at the ledger. And the ledger says that this entire metropolitan grid was built on the systematic psychological violation of human children.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is a massive accusation. You're saying that the premise of the world monsters scaring kids to power their city isn't just a plot device.
No.
It's an economic system.
Precisely. Think about the opening of the story. The city of Monstropolis is facing a crisis.
An energy crisis. Yeah.
It's not some supervillain trying to take over the world. It's an energy crisis.
Yeah.
Rolling blackouts. Lights flickering. Why? Because the resource they rely on is running out.
Right, the screams. They need screams to power the lights, the cars, the toaster ovens.
And what are screams?
Well, noise, sound, high decibels.
No. See, that's the mistake everyone makes. That's the surface level. If it were just sound, they could just bang drums. They could set up wind turbines. They could use loudspeakers.
So what is it then?
The report we have here, the Scream Monopoly, makes a terrifyingly lucid point. It's not magic. It's oil.
Oil.
They treat children's screens like a natural resource. They are mining trauma. The scream is a crude, volatile commodity.
Wow.
And just like our world relies on fossil fuels, their world relies on extracting the fight-or-flight response from a sentient species.
So when we see Sulley going to work, punching the clock, spinning that card.
He is a roughneck on an oil rig, or a miner in a coal pit.
But the mine.
The mine isn't a geological formation deep underground. The mine is a human child's bedroom, and the ore they are extracting is sheer terror.
But it does sound less charming.
A lot less.
But isn't that just the setup? They scare because they have to, right? They don't have solar panels. They have screams. It's just survival.
We scare because we care.
Yeah, that's the slogan.
It sounds nice. It rhymes. But let's look at the first section of our source material, the economics of terror. The report describes Monsters, Inc., not as a utility, but as a biorefinery.
A biorefinery. That implies a chemical process.
Yes, they are processing physiological fallout. Think about what happens biologically when a child screams in terror. It's not just noise.
Right, there's a physical reaction.
It's a biological event. Adrenaline spikes. Cortisol floods the system. The heart rate skyrockets. The muscles tense up.
It's a full-body response.
The report argues that the scream energy is actually a refined combustible made from that biological panic. They aren't catching sound waves. They're catching the energy of a nervous system entering shock.
And you mentioned an energy crisis. In the movie, they specifically say kids are harder to scare these days.
Exactly. And this is the most fascinating parallel to our own world. The report calls it the scream shortage, but it compares it directly to peak oil.
Peak oil being the point where we've extracted all the easy-to-get oil, and it becomes harder and more expensive to find more.
Right. In the monster world, the natural resource is childhood innocence, that capacity to believe in the boogeyman.
That's fading.
The report notes that human children are becoming desensitized. Violent media, the internet, a shrinking window of innocence, the purity of the resource is degrading.
So they can't just pop out and say boo anymore.
Not anymore, because the kids have seen worse on the news. The yield per scare is dropping.
So the blackouts in Monstropolis, that's an energy scarcity crisis caused by us, by human culture changing.
By the resource becoming resilient. Imagine if coal started fighting back, or if oil became harder to burn. That is the crisis.
Okay, wow.
And what does a monopoly do when its primary resource starts drying up?
Yeah.
Does it become more ethical? Does it say, maybe we should stop frightening children?
Usually history tells us they get more aggressive.
They do?
They start fracking, they start drilling in protected areas, they squeeze harder.
Exactly. And that is what we are seeing on the scare floor. The source describes the scare floor as a cross between a Fordian assembly line and a high-performance studio.
It's all about efficiency.
It's industrialized. It's not an art. It's a quota system. There is a leaderboard. There is pressure.
You know, I'm looking at this section on the physics of fear in the source notes. There's actual math here. I didn't expect math in a deep dive about a Pixar movie, but here we are.
And this is where it gets really interesting and frankly disturbing. The report tries to quantify what a scream actually is in this universe.
There's a formula.
There is a formula for the potential energy yield of a single scare event. They call it E sub y.
Yeah, I see it here. It's an integral equation. It lists variables like P sub fear.
Right. Let's break that down. P fear is the psychological intensity. This measures how genuine the terror is.
How real the fear is.
Exactly. Then you have A sub dB, which is the acoustic amplitude, how loud it is.
Yeah.
But look at the third variable. C sub mu.
C mu, the corporate extraction coefficient.
Yes.
That sounds like corporate speak for how good are we at stealing this?
Essentially, it represents the efficiency of the intake valves on the canister. The point of the math is to prove that they aren't just harvesting sound waves.
If it was just about volume.
If it were just volume, a loud radio would work. They can just give the kids drums. They are harvesting the intensity of the trauma.
They need the P fear.
They need that specific neurological spike that happens when a child believes they are in mortal danger. That is the P fear variable. If the kid knows it's fake, the P fear drops to 0 and you get no power.
So every canister we see on that conveyor belt, those yellow tanks, each one represents a child who truly believed for a moment that a monster was going to hurt them.
Correct. And that energy fuels cars, heats homes, and illuminates a city of millions.
The entire civilization is parasitic.
It feeds on the fear of another species.
That really changes how you look at the city shots in the movie. You see the glittering lights of Monstropolis and think, wow, beautiful animation. But now, every one of those lights is lit by a kid's nightmare.
And that brings us to the real-world parallels the report draws. It compares Monsters, Inc., to companies like BP or Shell, operating in places like the Niger Delta.
In what sense? How?
In the sense of a global utility monopoly with no competition and no regulation, exploiting a resource from a population that has no voice.
The children.
The human children are the indigenous population in this analogy. Their environment, their safety, their bedrooms is being degraded and strip-mined for the benefit of a foreign power.
And the monsters don't see it that way. Sulley doesn't seem to think he's doing anything wrong at the start.
Of course not, because of the propaganda, which leads us to the second major pillar of this conspiracy, the lie.
You're talking about the toxic thing, the idea that kids are poisonous.
Yes. Think about it. In the movie, every monster is terrified of touching a child. They believe a single touch could kill them.
It's like the central dogma of their society.
It is. But we, the audience, we know that's not true. We see Boo touch Sulley early on. He doesn't die. He doesn't melt.
Right, he freaks out thinking he's going to die, but he's fine. So it's a myth, but why? Why make your workforce terrified of the raw material they handle? That seems counterintuitive.
Doesn't it?
Usually you want workers to be comfortable with the materials.
The report calls this the toxicity myth, and it identifies 3 strategic purposes for this lie.
Okay.
The first is just simple risk management. If monsters are afraid of kids, they won't hang around. They'll scare and leave immediately.
So they don't get caught.
Right. This prevents human parents from catching a monster, which could lead to our world discovering theirs. It's an operational security measure.
Okay, that makes sense. Security. Get in, get the scream, get out before you get infected.
The second is labor discipline.
What do you mean by that?
It keeps the workers dependent on the company. If you think you've been contaminated, who do you call? The company, the CDA.
You rely on them for decontamination, for safety.
It creates a culture of fear within the factory. You're always one mistake away from death. It keeps them compliant.
And the third, you said there were 3.
The third is the most crucial and the most sinister: moral desensitization.
How does thinking a kid is toxic make you less moral? I don't follow.
It dehumanizes the victim. If you look at a child and see a sweet, innocent person, a boo, you might feel guilty about terrifying them every night.
You might start to ask questions.
You might start to ask, are we the bad guys?
Yeah.
But if you were told that the child is a toxic death trap, a biological hazard, a lethal weapon,
Then you don't feel empathy.
you feel self-preservation.
Wow. So it turns the child from a person into, well, a threat.
Or livestock. Dangerous livestock. It removes the moral burden. You can't farm livestock effectively if you're constantly worrying about their feelings.
So you make them into monsters.
By framing the child as toxic, the company ensures that the scarers view them as objects to be milked, not people to be respected. It's classic propaganda. Create another, so you don't have to feel bad about what you do to them.
And who enforces this narrative? Because you need muscle to keep a lie that big going.
The CDA,
Yeah.
Child Detection Agency. Those guys in the yellow hazmat suits.
We have a 2319. They are everywhere in the movie.
And the source material describes them not as safety officers, but as a paramilitary enforcement wing.
They are pretty intense. I mean, breaking windows, rappelling from ceilings, swarming the place.
Look at the 2319 protocol. We laugh at it in the movie because it's slapstick. A monster gets a white sock stuck to his back, and suddenly he's tackled, shaved, and scrubbed.
Yeah, George Sanderson. Poor guy. He gets absolutely wrecked.
But look at it through the lens of a police state.
It's public humiliation.
It's a theatrical public ritual. They don't just quietly take him aside and say, hey, George, you got something on your back.
No, they shut down the entire floor.
They shut down the floor. They destroy his property. They shave him bald in front of his colleagues. It's a performance designed to reinforce fear.
It's a message.
It tells every other worker, this is what happens if you step out of line. This is what happens if you get too close to the product.
It's total control. They detain individuals without due process. They destroy property. And nobody questions it. Everyone just stands back and watches. Even Sulley just watches.
Because they are terrified. The CDA ensures that the narrative of human toxicity is never questioned. It is the glue holding the exploitation together.
Right.
If you question the toxicity, you disappear.
Okay, so we have the economic need, the scream shortage. We have the psychological control, the toxicity lie. But now we have to talk about the machine.
The scream extractor.
This is the part of the movie that always genuinely scared me as a kid. Randall's secret project in the basement. It just looked nasty.
And in our audit, this is where we move from unethical business practices to industrialized cruelty. The report frames the scream extractor not as a rogue invention by a bad apple,
You mean Randall?
but as the logical evolution of the company's need for efficiency.
Wait, you're saying the company wanted this? I thought it was just Randall acting alone, maybe with Waternoose's silent approval.
Waternoose is the CEO. He is the company. And the report argues that the shift to the machine marks a transition from artisanal harvesting to industrial extraction.
Artisanal harvesting. That sounds like we're talking about coffee beans or something.
Think about the traditional scare. It relies on the monster's skill. It relies on the artistry of the roar. But crucially, it relies on the child's voluntary reaction.
The child has to participate, in a sense.
Yes, by screaming. It's inefficient. Sometimes the kid doesn't scream. Sometimes they cry or hide or just stare at you.
Right, a bad night at the office.
But the machine,
The machine doesn't care if you participate.
it bypasses agency entirely.
The source describes the mechanism in really gruesome detail. It says it's a high-powered vacuum seal over the mouth.
Forcibly pulling air and energy from the lungs. That's the quote from the report. It doesn't wait for you to scream. It sucks the scream out of you.
It's extracting the resource by force.
It is torture. Pure and simple. We see it tested on Jeff Fungus, Randall's assistant.
Yeah, he comes out looking like a dried prune. He's totally drained, pale.
The report analyzes the physiological effects. He was pale, wheezing. in a state of near respiratory failure. Now, imagine that machine applied to a human child.
Oh, God.
A child's lungs are smaller, more fragile.
The report says it would be fatal.
Immediate asphyxiation, pulmonary trauma, and death. That is the assessment. If that machine is left on, it kills the child.
It doesn't just take the fear.
It takes the life force. It sucks the breath out of them until they collapse.
And Waternoose knew this, the CEO.
He had to. He approved it. This brings us to what the report calls the Waternoose indictment.
Okay.
There is a line in the movie, probably the most famous villain line, "I'll kidnap 1,000 children before I let this company die."
I always thought that was just him being dramatic, villain monologue stuff.
No, that is a mission statement. That is the verdict of a ruthless capitalist. He prioritized corporate survival over human life.
He looked at the bottom line.
He looked at the balance sheet, saw the scream shortage, and decided that murder was an acceptable operational cost.
Extraction at any cost.
Exactly. The report calls it a scorched earth policy. When the wells run dry, you don't stop. You blow up the mountain. Randall's machine is the fracking of the emotional world.
Violent, lethal.
And it was the company's plan A for the future.
It's hard to reconcile that with the image of the company we see at the start. We scare because we care.
That hypocrisy is the point. Corporations often wrap their most dangerous activities in the friendliest slogans.
Yeah, that's true.
But let's shift perspective for a minute. We talked about the monsters, the economy, the machine. But we need to talk about the victims.
The kids.
The report asks us to visualize the door vault.
Oh, the chase scene. That vault is incredible. Millions of doors on those tracks. It goes on forever.
Millions. The report notes the scale. 1/2 a mile long, taller than the Empire State Building. But think about what that represents.
It's millions of bedrooms.
Millions of portals into the private sanctuaries of human children. The implication is that the entire human population is a captive energy source.
Every kid is a potential target.
There isn't a child on Earth who isn't a potential battery for Monsters, Inc.
And when a door is dead, we see that happen.
We see that too. The wood chipper. When a child stops reacting, when the well runs dry, the door is shredded.
The livestock is discarded.
Exactly. They cut the connection because the resource is exhausted. They don't care about the child growing up. They care that the child stopped yielding voltage.
That's weak.
And consider the psychological warfare. The report asks us to imagine being the child on the other side of that door.
I mean, I was scared of the dark as a kid. I think everyone is, to some extent.
But in this universe, that fear isn't irrational. It's justified. The report calls it a gaslighting campaign. It's a multi-generational psychological war.
How so?
Children see monsters. They tell their parents. Their parents say, "It's just your imagination. Go back to sleep."
There's no such thing as monsters.
But there are. And they're coming out of the closet to harvest you. The report mentions the medical consequences. Specific phobias like nyctophobia
Fear of the dark.
or acluophobia. These aren't just disorders in this world. They are scars from the extraction process. These children are being traumatized nightly to keep the lights on in another dimension.
It really is an invasion. Your bedroom is supposed to be your safe space.
And Monsters, Inc. turns it into an extraction site. It's a violation of sanctuary.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me and a little weird. The report mentions something called the temporal parasite theory. This sounds like sci-fi.
It connects to the famous Pixar theory, which you see online a lot. The report suggests that the doors aren't just portals across space.
You're not going to say time.
They are portals across time.
Time travel. Seriously.
The theory is that the monsters are actually mutated descendants of humanity from Earth's distant future.
Whoa! So they aren't aliens. They're us from the future.
Or what we become. But in their future, the energy is gone. The sun has died out, or they've ruined the planet, who knows? So the doors are time machines that allow them to harvest energy from their own ancestors.
That's a mind bender. So they're harvesting the fear of their great-great-great-grandparents.
Exactly. And the report argues this explains the toxicity lie perfectly.
How does that kind?
Why are they so afraid of touching us? Maybe it's not just germs. Maybe it's the grandfather paradox.
Oh, if you go back and interact too much with the past, you might change something and erase your own existence.
Precisely. If a monster accidentally kills a child, that child might have been their own ancestor. Poof, the monster ceases to exist.
So the toxicity myth.
It serves as a safeguard against erasing their own timeline. They can scare us, but they can't bond with us. They can't let us know they are real. It keeps the timeline stable while they drain it of energy.
So they are temporal parasites. feeding on the past to power a dead future, that adds a whole new layer of tragedy to it.
It does. It frames them not just as predators, but as desperate survivors of a failed civilization eating their own history to survive.
But let's come back to the ending of the movie, because this is where most people feel good.
Right. The resolution.
Sulley defeats Waternoose. He saves Boo. And he revolutionizes the company. Laughter is 10 times more powerful than screams. They switch to making kids laugh. It's a happy ending. They aren't scaring kids anymore. They're entertaining them. Sulley's the good guy.
And this brings us to Section 5 of the report, the laughter scam.
Scam. How is it a scam? They're making kids happy.
The report states clearly, this is not a moral victory, it is a business pivot.
But they aren't hurting kids. That has to be better.
Let me ask you, are they asking for consent?
Well, no. I mean, they're still sneaking into rooms.
Are they still using the children as an energy source without their knowledge?
Yes.
Then the exploitation hasn't stopped. It has just become more efficient. Look at the math again. The report highlights the 10x efficiency factor.
Yeah. Sulley says laughter is 10 times more powerful.
That is a 900% increase in productivity.
Yeah.
Sulley didn't save the kids because he's a saint. He discovered a super fuel.
So this wasn't about ethics for the company.
If screams are coal, laughter is nuclear power.
So you're saying the motivation for the board of directors wasn't morality, it was yield.
The motivation for the company accepting the change was absolutely yield. Do you think the shareholders of Monsters, Inc. care about smiles? No. They care that the lights stay on. They care about quarterly earnings.
And Sulley just found a way to squeeze more voltage out of the same.
Livestock.
Man, livestock. You really are sticking to that term.
It's the harsh reality of the report. The children are still batteries, and the report calls this greenwashing.
Like clean coal.
Yeah.
You're making something destructive sound environmentally friendly.
Exactly. It looks nicer. It feels softer. The public feels better about it. Oh, look, we aren't scaring them anymore. We're making them giggle.
But the fundamental relationship hasn't changed.
The predator-prey dynamic, the harvester-harvested dynamic, it remains.
But isn't it better to be made to laugh than to be made to scream? I mean, come on.
Marginally, for the child, sure. I'd rather laugh than scream. But the report argues that laughter power is actually more insidious for 3 reasons.
Okay, hit me. Why is it worse?
First, the monopoly persists. Because the image is now soft and happy, nobody is going to regulate them. They avoid scrutiny. It secures their monopoly forever.
True. Nobody investigates the clown. They investigate the monster.
Second, passive livestock.
What do you mean?
A kid who is screaming wakes up their parents, "Mom, there's a monster."
Yeah.
That's a risk. It creates conflict. But a kid who is laughing,
They just giggle in their sleeve.
they don't raise the alarm.
So it's stealthier.
Much stealthier. It reduces the risk of detection. It pacifies the target.
And what's a third reason?
A pacified workforce. The monsters used to be stressed. They were constantly on edge about toxicity. Now they feel like heroes. They are jokesters. They feel benevolent.
So they don't ask questions anymore. They feel like the good guy, so they stop looking at the system itself.
Exactly. They are still breaking into homes. They are still stealing emotional energy. But now they feel good about it. It's the perfect trap. The worker is happy, the victim is compliant, and the corporation makes 10 times the profit.
The report mentions the imaginary friend ruse here, too. What's that about?
Yes. It makes a strange reference to characters like Bing Bong from Inside Out. The idea is, under the laughter regime, monsters can infiltrate deeper. They can become imaginary friends.
Oh, it's dark.
This allows them to manipulate the child's trust to charge their batteries. It's emotional grooming for energy extraction. They build a relationship solely to harvest energy from it.
When you put it that way, Sulley isn't a savior. Not at all.
The outro of our source material gives us the verdict. It says, revisit the character of Sulley. He is not a savior. He is the new CEO of a more efficient child harvesting empire.
He literally becomes the boss. We see him in the tie.
He does. The transition was from the stick fear to the carrot laughter. But the cage remains the same.
The system is the same.
The infrastructure of the doors, the surveillance, the containment, it's all still there. He didn't dismantle the machine. He just recalibrated it for a different fuel source.
I'm honestly left a bit speechless. I came in here thinking about Kitty, and now I'm thinking about industrial extraction grids and temporal parasites.
That's the job of the deep dive, to see what's really under the hood.
Yeah.
And the report ends with a final, provocative thought.
What's that?
It says the structural logic of capitalism suggests that the answer to the next crisis is inevitably yes.
The answer to what?
The lingering threat.
Mm-hmm.
We had a scream shortage, right? Children got desensitized to fear.
Right. They saw too much scary stuff. The resource got harder to extract.
So what happens when the laughter shortage hits?
Oh, no.
What happens when kids get desensitized to the jokes? When the slapstick doesn't work anymore? When the laughter wells run dry just like the scream wells did?
When the energy density drops.
The city goes dark again.
And the board of directors comes knocking.
And when the city goes dark
Right.
and the shareholders demand power, will Sulley accept bankruptcy? Will he shut down the company and let his civilization collapse into the dark?
Oh. He's a good guy, but he's also the CEO now. He's responsible for all of them.
Or will they go back to the basement? Will they dust off Randall's machine?
And turn this section back on.
The source material leaves us with this final, chilling line. The doors are still open, and the canisters are never full enough.
Well, I'm never going to watch that movie the same way again. That is terrifying, but fascinating. It forces you to look at the systems behind the stories we love.
It's important to question the narrative, even the fuzzy ones.
Yeah,
Especially the fuzzy ones.
absolutely. Thank you for walking us through this nightmare. It was something else.
Anytime.
And to everyone listening, sweet dreams. Maybe check your closets tonight.
And stay safe.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.